The blizzard struck without warning. A white curtain enveloped everything, blurring the lines between sky and earth. Antonia tightened the reins, but Dawn, her mare, only whinnied in fright, freezing solid in the middle of the snow-choked road. "Come on, sweetheart. We can't stop here," Antonia whispered, her lips chapped and blue from the cold, trying to quell the rising panic. Annie's home, alone. Shivering against the biting wind, she pulled the old sheepskin coat tighter around her, the one her husband, Geoffrey, had thrown over her shoulders before she left. Now, that coat felt like her only defense against the brutal cold that seemed to penetrate to her very bones. Yellow eyes appeared unexpectedly. First, a single glowing gaze pierced the white curtain, then a second, a third. Wolves emerged from the forest silently, like ghosts, semicircling the sleigh. Antonia froze, unable to believe her eyes. Fear immobilized her body, turning her into an icy statue. This is it. A detached thought flickered through her mind. I'll never see Geoffrey or little Annie again. The Alpha, a massive gray beast with a scar across its muzzle, bared its fangs and took a step forward. Antonia squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the inevitable. Time stopped, frozen like a fragile shard of ice on the edge of eternity. Before we begin, please tell us where you're from, subscribe, hit like, and watch until the end. Here we go. Grandpa, you need to move to the city. You're all alone out here. Marina tried to shout over the blizzard raging outside the window. Mom and I worry ourselves sick. Geoffrey just chuckled into his thick beard, his gaze fixed on the logs crackling in the hearth. What would I do in your concrete jungle? The old man shrugged. I'm fine here, in Pine Ridge. The air's clean, and my Antonia's here, in the churchyard. How could I leave her? The blizzard outside howled with triple the force, as if trying to reach the people huddled behind the log walls. The ancient log cabin, blackened with age, reliably protected them from the elements, creaking and groaning but holding firm. Marina sighed, glancing at the faded photograph on the wall, a young woman with a gentle smile and perceptive eyes, holding a baby. Grandma's been gone 5 years now, Grandpa, she said softly, sitting beside her grandfather on a low bench. You'll be 70 soon. How do you manage alone, especially in winter? Geoffrey just grunted, tossing another log into the fire. His wrinkled face, deeply furrowed by the years, remained unreadable. I've spent my whole life in these forests, Marina. 30 years I worked as a ranger, even before your mother was born. These woods remember my every step. You think city walls will protect me better than these logs and the forest around them? There was no resentment in the old man's voice, but an unshakable conviction of a man who had found his place in the world. Marina lowered her eyes. 6 months ago, she'd returned to Willow Creek from the capital with a journalism degree, but for now she was working at the local paper, writing notes about town festivals and new paved paths in the park. Yet she had once dreamed of writing about real life, about people like her grandfather, the last representatives of a passing era when humanity and nature lived in harmony. At least keep your phone charged, she continued, pulling bags of groceries from her satchel. Mom and I call, and you don't pick up, so we thought you'd frozen alone out here or something. Her grandfather waved an annoyed hand. I charge it. I just keep forgetting where it is, that phone. We're out in the sticks, the reception's terrible. Now, if you just write letters, like in the old days, Marina smiled. Real paper letters. That would be something new in the age of messengers and video calls. Fancy some tea? Geoffrey rose with a creak, heading for the old pot-bellied kettle on the table. "I'd love some, of course." His granddaughter nodded, unwrapping the provisions she'd brought. "A warm-up wouldn't hurt after that journey. I barely made it, you know. Had to leave the car at the general store, then hike through the snowdrifts." The kettle gurgled, releasing clouds of steam. Her grandfather took porcelain cups with blue rims from an old cabinet. Grandma Antonia's, Marina remembered. Reflections of the fire danced on the walls, creating an illusion that the house breathed, living its own unique life. "Weren't you scared walking through the woods?" Geoffrey suddenly asked, looking intently at his granddaughter. "The wolves are hungry these days, coming closer to the village." Something strange flickered in her grandpa's eyes when he said the word wolves. Pain? Anxiety? Marina couldn't tell. "Wolves?" she repeated. "No, I didn't see any. Although, on my way here, I gave a ride to a girl, a strange one, in a white fur coat. She said something about wolves, but I didn't pay it any mind." Geoffrey froze with the cup in his hand. "In a white fur coat, you say?" His voice suddenly became taut as a string. "And where did you drop her off?" Marina shrugged. "Nowhere, really. I drove her to the general store, and she said she'd walk the rest of the way herself. It wasn't far. She had a strange saying, something like, 'If you're afraid of wolves, don't go into the woods.'" "Why?" Her grandfather slowly sank onto the bench and suddenly looked very old and tired to Marina. "Nothing," he answered quietly. "It's just that nobody in Pine Ridge wears white fur coats. Probably someone passing through." But Marina was a journalist, even if a beginner, and she knew when people were holding back. "Tell me about the wolves, Grandpa," she asked, taking a sip of hot tea. "Are there many around here?" Geoffrey was silent for a long time, staring into space. Then, as if waking up, he smiled with just his lips. "Don't be afraid, child. The wolves won't bother you." And there was something in those simple words that sent a chill down Marina's spine. 40 years ago, Geoffrey returned to his hometown of Pine Ridge after his military service, tall, broad-shouldered, with the open gaze of gray eyes. His mother was overjoyed with her son. Neighboring girls cast admiring glances, but he seemed to notice no one. Since childhood, the forest had been his second home. He knew all the trails, all the ravines, could walk from the village to the farthest outpost with his eyes closed. The mayor, seeing this, offered him a position as an assistant ranger. "You spend your days and nights in the woods anyway, Geoffrey," he said then, clapping the young man on the shoulder. "Might as well get paid for it." That year, a young school teacher came to Pine Ridge. Antonia Miller, slender as a birch tree, with a braid down to her waist and eyes the color of spring foliage. The children adored her, and mothers dreamed of her for their sons. Geoffrey met her in the autumn in the forest. She was gathering hawthorn berries, and he was passing by on one of his rounds. Who knows how the spark ignited between them? But by winter, all of Pine Ridge knew there would be a wedding. "Tell me, how did you and Grandma meet?" Marina asked, adding kindling to the fire. "Mom says you saved her from a bear in the woods, and Grandma always laughed when she heard that." Geoffrey chuckled, rubbing his knee. An old wound always ached mercilessly before a blizzard. "There was no bear," he admitted. "Your mother just liked heroic stories. But Antonia and she was gathering herbs for her tinctures. She was a healer, even though she worked as a teacher, knew every blade of grass, what it was good for. I saw her and knew she was my destiny." "How romantic!" Marina smiled. Romantic phooey! Her grandfather waved it off. Life. We lived together for 50 years, raised your mother, helped you get on your feet. He fell silent, and in the quiet intensity, the logs in the hearth crackled especially loudly. Grandpa, why did you become such a recluse after Grandma passed away? Marina asked gently. You used to go to Willow Creek sometimes, but now... Jeffrey sighed heavily. The city's noisy, child, and I need peace. Antonia always said, don't uproot yourself, or you'll wither. So I put down roots here, deep. Outside it had grown dark, and the blizzard had subsided, turning into a light snowfall. Large flakes drifted slowly to the ground, covering the already high snowdrifts with a fresh blanket. Hear that? Jeffrey suddenly asked, listening intently. Marina froze, straining her ears. A distant, barely discernible wolf howl pierced the night silence. They're out there, her grandfather whispered. His voice changed somehow. Always nearby. Wolves? Marina whispered back. Jeffrey nodded, his gaze fixed on the window, behind which an impenetrable darkness had gathered. They're like people, child. Some are good, some are bad. Everyone has their own truth. That phrase made Marina wary. There was more to her grandfather's words than general musings. Have you ever encountered wolves? She asked cautiously. Jeffrey slowly turned his gaze from the window and looked at his granddaughter as if trying to decide something important. I have, he finally answered. More than once. It's a long story, too long to tell in the dead of night. But I'm not in a hurry. Marina moved closer. The blizzard's over, but I'm staying the night anyway. Please, tell me. Jeffrey was silent for a long time, closing his eyes as if gathering his thoughts. Then he sighed heavily and began to speak, quietly, almost mumbling to himself. It was a long time ago, when your mother was just a little girl, about 4 years old. 35 years ago. It was February, the harshest month of the Canadian winter. The cold was so severe that trees cracked in the forest and ravens fell mid-flight, frozen. Jeffrey at that time worked as a ranger and spent all day in the saddle patrolling distant sections. That day, he was returning from a remote outpost. Poachers had started causing trouble there, hunting elk without permission. The weather turned nasty. A wall of blizzard, a wind so strong it could blow you off your horse. Jeffrey decided to cut through Wolf Hollow, a ravine between the hills where even hunters usually feared to go. Why Wolf Hollow? Marina interrupted. Were there wolves there? Not just present. Her grandfather shook his head. It was their territory, sacred. The old folks used to say that the wolves there were special, not like ordinary ones. Guardians of the wilderness, that's what they called them. Marina raised her eyebrows. Some local legend? I've never heard it. No legend, Jeffrey said firmly. The truth of life. But listen on. He was making his way through the hollow, holding on to the mane of his horse, Blaze, when he heard a strange sound, a moan, a howl, muffled by the wind. He stopped the horse, listened, and again that same sound, only clearer now. Jeffrey dismounted, tied Blaze to a stunted pine, and made his way through the snowdrifts, searching for the source of the sound. Soon he stumbled upon a small crevice in the rock, powdered with snow. The moans came from there. I cleared the snow, Jeffrey continued, staring into the fire, and I saw her, a white she-wolf, young still but large, lying there barely breathing, and the snow around her was soaked with blood. Was she wounded? Marina leaned forward, forgetting her cooled tea. Poachers? Her grandfather nodded, and his eyes glinted with anger. They set a trap. Broke her leg, but she broke free, managed to get away, but not far. She was bleeding out. He fell silent, as if reliving that moment. "And what did you do?" his granddaughter asked softly. "What did I do? What did I do?" Geoffrey ran a hand through his gray beard. "I couldn't leave her there. It wouldn't have been humane. But dragging her home? Well, she's a wolf, a wild animal, and Antonia and Annie were home. But to abandon her would be like shooting her myself." He spread his sheepskin coat, carefully laid the wolf on it, wrapped her up, and tied her to the saddle. Blaze, sensing the scent of a predator, balked, but Geoffrey calmed him with a gentle touch and a firm hand. They reached home after dark. Geoffrey immediately carried the animal to the barn, where it was warmer. Antonia was frightened at first, but then, seeing the wolf's condition, she herself began to help her husband. "Grandma didn't object?" Marina asked, surprised. A wild wolf in the house. Geoffrey smiled and his eyes warmed. "Your grandmother, Marina, was special. She had a huge heart. There was room for everyone. A creation of God," she would say. "How could one not help?" And she had a particularly special relationship with forest animals. She saw every bird, every beast, as an individual with a living soul. Antonia then cleaned the wound, treated it with a mixture of medicinal herbs, and bandaged it. The she-wolf watched them with intelligent eyes the whole time, not growling, not resisting, as if understanding they were helping her. "I gave her a name," Geoffrey suddenly said. "Gray," even though she wasn't gray, but white as snow, but the name stuck. For several days Gray lay in the barn, barely moving. Geoffrey and Antonia took turns bringing her food, sometimes a piece of meat, sometimes milk, in a bowl. At first, the wolf didn't eat, but on the third day, she began to take food bit by bit. Annie, Marina's mother, was just a toddler then, but by some intuition she understood no one should be told that a she-wolf lived in their barn. It was as if adult fears had been transferred to her. "And why couldn't anyone talk about it?" Marina asked, tossing a small log onto the fire. Geoffrey's expression darkened. In those years, wolves were mercilessly hunted. Bounty hunters were given rewards for every pelt. The hunters in Pine Ridge were ruthless, especially Stephen, the crew chief. If he'd found out, he would have shot Gray without a second thought, and we might have been punished for harboring a pest to the national economy, as they called it back then. Days passed. The wound on her paw healed, but Gray was in no hurry to leave. She settled into the barn, even began coming out into the fenced backyard to stretch her legs. Surprisingly, the yard dog, Rover, didn't bark at her, as if he recognized her as one of his own. Antonia often sat beside the she-wolf, talking to her as if she were a person, telling her stories. And Gray listened, head tilted to the side, her gaze far from beastly. "She lived with us for about 2 months," Geoffrey continued, "and then spring came, the snow melted, and Gray became restless, drawn to the forest. Antonia then said, 'Let her go, Jeff. You can't keep a free spirit captive.' One morning, Geoffrey opened the barn door, and it was empty. The she-wolf had left, without even saying goodbye. Only at the threshold lay a strange stone, gray, with a white vein, resembling a wolf's head. I knew she'd gone back to the forest, to her own kind, the old man said quietly, as if talking to himself. But I often caught myself, when stepping onto the porch, gazing into the tree line, hoping for a glimpse of a white shadow. Marina noticed her grandfather secretly wipe away a tear. "And then she came back?" his granddaughter asked, though something told her the story was far from over. Geoffrey nodded, but didn't answer immediately. He rose, creaking, and went to an old chest of drawers. From the bottom drawer he took out a battered, leather-bound notebook. "Your grandmother's journal," he explained, carefully turning the yellowed pages. "Antonia wrote everything down, said human memory is fickle, but paper keeps things." He found the right page and handed the notebook to his granddaughter. "Read it aloud," he requested. "I've misplaced my glasses." Marina carefully took the journal. Her grandmother's handwriting was small, but clear, the lines neat, as if drawn with a ruler. May 15th, 1985. Today I saw Gray. I was returning from school through the aspen grove. It's a quicker way. And suddenly I felt someone was watching me. I turned around, and there she was, standing between the trees, white as a ghost. She didn't approach, but she didn't leave either. I greeted her as I would a person, asked her how life was in the wild. She looked as if she understood every word. Then she turned and disappeared into the thicket. And I stood there for a long time, unable to move. Could she have come to check on us? Marina turned the page. June 3rd, 1985. Geoffrey told me an amazing thing today. He was returning from a distant patrol, caught in a thunderstorm in Wolf Hollow. He was looking for shelter and suddenly saw Gray. She was standing on a rock, and next to her, a whole pack of wolves. Geoffrey says there was a huge gray wolf among them with a scar across its muzzle, apparently the alpha. Gray turned to them, and Geoffrey could have sworn the wolves were conferring. My husband thinks she became part of a new pack. Perhaps even found a mate. I don't know why, but that thought warms my soul. Every living creature deserves a family and a home. Marina looked up from the journal. Grandma really believed the wolf understood them. Geoffrey thoughtfully stroked his beard. She didn't just believe, she knew. Antonia always said there's a thin line between humans and animals, especially when hearts are open. Here in the Pacific Northwest, old-timers believe some animals are guardians of the wilderness, messengers of the forest spirits. Gray wasn't just a she-wolf. There was something about her, something special. And she became part of a new pack? Marina asked, turning the pages of the journal. Not just a part. Her grandfather shook his head. She became their leader, a female alpha, which is rare among wolves. The gray one with the scar was her mate. Together, they controlled the entire territory from Pine Ridge to the Blue Mountains. Marina read a few more entries. Each mentioned the white she-wolf. Sometimes she was seen at the edge of the forest. Sometimes a distinctive howl was heard at night. Sometimes tracks were found near the house. It seemed Gray hadn't just returned to the wild. She had become a link between the human world and the forest. October 12th, 1985. Annie got lost in the woods yesterday. She went berry picking and wandered off. Geoffrey and the men searched all night, with lanterns, with dogs. I nearly went mad with fear. And in the morning, our girl walked out of the woods to the house herself, safe and sound. She told us something so incredible it's hard to believe. She says a white dog came to her at night and led her home, showing her the way. Geoffrey found tracks, wolf tracks, next to children's tracks, all the way from the distant clearing to our house. It was her. Gray. Oh, God, how can we ever thank her? She saved Mom? Marina couldn't believe what she had read. Why did Mom never tell us about this? Jeffrey sighed heavily. Your mother, Annie, was little. With time she convinced herself it was a dream or an invention. Adults often refuse to believe what doesn't fit their understanding of the world. Besides, after what happened in the winter of 1990, we decided not to talk about Gray anymore. And what happened in the winter of 1990? Marina put down the journal and leaned forward, feeling she was approaching the main secret. Jeffrey was silent for a long time, staring at the fire. His face, etched with wrinkles, seemed carved from stone. It's a story we buried deep, Marina. A story about how your mother almost died and about who saved her. January 1990. The winter was brutal. Snow piled up to the waist, and the cold was such that even the oldest inhabitants couldn't remember anything like it. In Pine Ridge, firewood was rationed, fires kept to a minimum, and children were not sent to school. Antonia, at that time, worked at the Willow Creek School, teaching biology to high school students. She had to travel to the county seat once a week, 30 miles away. That day, she was delayed at a faculty meeting. They were discussing academic performance, plans for the spring semester. When they finished, dusk had already fallen. Colleagues offered to stay the night, to wait out the approaching blizzard, but Antonia just shook her head. Annie's home alone, she said. Jeffrey's on duty at the distant outpost. He won't be back until tomorrow. I can't stay. They hitched her horse, wrapped her in a sheepskin coat, and accompanied her to the edge of the village. The road to Pine Ridge was well known. Even in the dark, she could navigate it without problems. At first, everything went well. But about halfway, a blizzard rose, sudden, furious, as if an evil spirit had decided to test human endurance. Visibility dropped to zero, snow blinded her, and the wind howled so much it seemed death itself was calling her name. Jeffrey's face was frozen like a wax mask, his gaze fixed somewhere beyond the cabin walls, as if he could see through time and space that fateful evening. You don't know what a real forest blizzard is like, he finally said in a hollow voice. It's not just snow and wind. It's a living thing, hungry, merciless. It gets under your clothes, chills your soul, whispers of death. And in such a blizzard, wolves become desperate. Jeffrey clenched his fists so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Antonia almost made it home, he continued, each word delivered with effort. There was only a little left to Pine Ridge, about 2 miles. Little Annie was waiting for her at home under the care of a neighbor, and suddenly Dawn froze solid. Her body trembled violently, her nostrils flared, puffing clouds of steam into the frosty air. Antonia didn't immediately understand what was happening. The blizzard deafened, blinded, drove her mad. The first pair of eyes appeared to the right of the sleigh. 2 amber lights, burning with a hungry fire, then a second, a third. They emerged from the snow curtain silently like ghosts, wolves, gray shadows of death. Antonia's heart skipped a beat, then pounded so hard it felt like it would burst from her chest. With fingers numb from fear, she tried to feel in the sleigh for anything that could serve as a weapon. Nothing, only a bundle of textbooks and a thin whip. "God, help me," she whispered, feeling her blood turn to ice in her veins. "Annie, my little girl." The wolves tightened their circle. There were no fewer than a dozen of them, lean, hungry, with sunken flanks and bared fangs. Their eyes glowed in the darkness like embers, and clouds of steam burst from their open mouths, along with guttural snarls. From behind the pack stepped the alpha, a massive gray beast with a scar across its entire muzzle. He was taller, more massive than the others, with powerful paws and jaws capable of snapping an elk bone. His gaze expressed neither hatred nor malice, only a cold intention to kill. "Do you know what real fear is?" Jeffrey looked directly into his granddaughter's eyes. "It's when you realize death has come for you and there's no escape." Antonia later said that in those seconds she saw her entire life as if from outside, in short flashes like frames from a movie. Our wedding, Annie's birth, a school classroom full of children's faces. The alpha took the first step towards the sleigh. The other wolves tensed, ready to follow. Antonia squeezed her eyes shut, understanding that this was the end. And at that moment, a roar tore through the silence. Not just an animal's roar, a battle cry, full of such fury and strength that even the blizzard seemed to pause for a moment. A white lightning bolt sliced through the snowy curtain, crashing into the ranks of the wolf pack. Gray, her fur stood on end, making her seem twice her normal size, her eyes burning with unnatural fury. Baring her fangs, she stood between the sleigh and the alpha, a living shield, ready to defend to her last breath. "It was like the meeting of two elemental forces," Jeffrey continued, his voice trembling. "Gray and the alpha, white against gray, gratitude against hunger." They circled each other, two predators, two warriors, two unyielding wills. Gray moved with incredible grace, every muscle taut. The alpha paced on powerful paws, his eyes fixed on his opponent. The other wolves retreated, forming a circle, an ancient ritual of alpha combat. The gray one attacked first, a lightning-fast leap, jaws snapping an inch from the white throat. But Gray was faster, an elegant turn, and her teeth snapped at the very ear of her opponent. Snow swirled beneath their paws as they clashed in a deadly struggle. Antonia couldn't move. She watched as the two beasts fought for life and death, and gradually she began to understand an incredible thing. The white she-wolf was fighting for her, protecting her at the cost of her own life. This wasn't just a fight for territory or prey. Jeffrey shook his head. Gray fought for the right to protect a human, for the right to repay a debt, for her honor, if you will. The alpha's fangs tore a clump of white fur. A crimson stain spread across the snow. But Gray didn't even whimper in pain. Twisting, she made an impossible leap and latched onto the gray wolf's neck. He howled, trying to shake her off, but the white she-wolf held on with a death grip. When they broke their fatal embrace, both were breathing heavily. Blood from Gray's wounds stained the snow around her pink. The gray alpha limped, his neck mangled. It all came down to a look. Not a growl, not a bite, not a stance. A look. Gray looked into the alpha's eyes with such unyielding will, such readiness to go to the end, that gradually a flicker of understanding appeared in the gray one's amber eyes. He was dealing not just with a she-wolf, but with something greater, a force beyond his comprehension. For a long minute they stood, staring into each other's eyes, and the blizzard swirled around them, as if not daring to interfere in this ancient dialogue of predators. Then slowly, almost imperceptibly, the alpha lowered his head. By a fraction of an inch, but it was enough. An admission of defeat, an admission of the superiority of spirit over the hunger of the flesh. The gray wolf turned and slowly limped away, leaving a trail of bloody footprints in the snow. One by one, the other wolves followed him, dissolving into the blizzard like ghosts. Antonia said that when the wolves left, such a silence fell that you could hear the snowflakes falling. Geoffrey spoke almost in a whisper, and then Gray turned to her. The white she-wolf stood, breathing heavily, blood seeping from wounds on her side and shoulder, but there was no pain in her eyes, only quiet determination. She slowly approached the sleigh and looked at Antonia with a long, piercing gaze. It was not the gaze of a beast. Something deeply human was legible in it. Understanding, wisdom, a connection that transcended the boundaries of species. Antonia felt tears freezing on her eyelashes, but these were not tears of fear. It was the realization of a miracle she had witnessed. "Thank you," she whispered with lips numb from the cold. "Thank you for everything." Gray blinked as if in response. Then, gathering her last strength, she moved forward along the road, limping and leaving a broken chain of crimson tracks on the snow-white ground. After a few steps, she turned and looked at Antonia, as if saying, "Follow me." Antonia understood, Geoffrey continued. Gray didn't just save her from the pack. She decided to escort her all the way to the village, and Dawn, surprisingly, was no longer afraid. She obediently followed the white she-wolf, who led them through the blizzard, choosing the shortest and safest path. And so they reached Pine Ridge, the woman in the sleigh and the white she-wolf, walking fearlessly ahead. At the very edge of the village, Gray stopped. She turned, looked at Antonia one last time, and then disappeared into the snowy curtain. Antonia returned home to Annie, only thanks to her, Geoffrey finished, his voice trembling. If it hadn't been for Gray, if it hadn't been for her gratitude, our family could have lost what was most precious. Marina sat in silence, stunned by what she had heard. The story seemed incredible, but something in her grandfather's voice, in his eyes, in the pain with which he spoke, left no doubt. It had all happened exactly as he described. "Why did you never tell us?" she asked softly, "and who would have believed it?" The old man grimaced bitterly. "Fairy tales, the inventions of an old forest ranger. That's what people would have said. And the times were different. Wolves were hunted, considered pests. If they had known about Gray, they would have tracked her down, killed her. No, it was better to keep silent." "And then? Did you see her again?" Geoffrey nodded. "Many times. She became the guardian of our family, an unseen protector. Sometimes we found tracks near the house, large wolf paw prints in the snow. Sometimes we heard a distinctive howl at night. Antonia said it was Gray letting us know everything was all right." He reached for a shelf and took down a small carved box. He opened it and carefully took out something wrapped in a piece of soft cloth. "Here." He held out the bundle to his granddaughter. "Look." Marina carefully unwrapped the cloth. In her palm lay a strange gray stone with a white vein, vaguely resembling a wolf's head. "The very one," she whispered, remembering her grandfather's story. "The one Gray left when she first left?" "Yes," Geoffrey nodded. "Antonia called it the wolf's charm. She said that, as long as it was with us, Gray would always be nearby, even if we couldn't see her." When dawn broke, the blizzard had subsided. Marina stepped onto the porch and took a deep breath of the frosty air. The world around seemed magical. Fresh snow, sparkling in the sun, trees in crystal hoar-frost, the clear blue of the sky. It was hard to believe that only yesterday a furious storm had raged here. "What beauty!" Geoffrey appeared on the porch, wrapping himself in an old sheepskin coat. "That's what I love about the wilderness winter, its pristine nature." Marina smiled. After a night spent talking, her grandfather seemed rejuvenated, as if the lifted weight of the secret had returned some of his vitality. "Grandpa and Gray, could she still be alive?" Marina suddenly asked, gazing into the edge of the forest. Geoffrey shook his head. "No, child. Wolves in the wild don't live that long. More than 30 years have passed. But," he smiled, "old-timers believe that the souls of special animals don't fully depart. They become guardians of their places, their forests. Perhaps Gray is now the guardian spirit of our wilderness." Marina pondered. The idea of a guardian spirit seemed both naive and profoundly right. "And what do you think about the person I gave a ride to yesterday? That strange girl in the white fur coat?" Geoffrey narrowed his eyes shrewdly. "Who knows, Marina? Who knows? The wilderness holds many mysteries, not all of them revealed to us." He went inside, and Marina remained on the porch, gazing at the snow-covered expanse. Something had changed in her perception of the world after her grandfather's story. It was as if a door had opened to another reality, where people and nature were connected by invisible but strong threads. "Grandpa!" she suddenly called out, coming inside. "Can I take Grandma's journal? I'd like to read it all the way through." Geoffrey thought for a moment, then nodded. "Take it. Antonia, I think, would be glad that her granddaughter will read her notes. Only, what do you need them for?" Marina sat next to her grandfather. "I want to write a book," she said simply. "The story of Gray and your family. A story about the connection between humanity and wild nature, about gratitude, about a memory stronger than time." Geoffrey was silent for a long time, looking at his granddaughter as if he were seeing her for the first time. "You're just like Antonia," he finally said quietly. "The same bright soul. Write it. Just change the names. And the name of the village, too. We don't need curious folks coming here." "Of course," Marina nodded. "It will be a book about what's important, not a news report from the scene." Outside, a distant howl suddenly echoed, drawn out, melodic, like the song of the wind in a winter forest. Geoffrey and Marina exchanged glances. "Wolves," her grandfather said, "far away in Wolf Hollow. They always howl there after a big blizzard." But something in his eyes told Marina he was thinking of something entirely different, of the white she-wolf who once tied her fate to their family, of the ancient secret of the wilderness, of a miracle that could not be explained but could be felt with the heart. A year later, Geoffrey sat on the porch watching the last rays of the summer sun gild the tops of the pines. It had been a warm, bountiful summer. Mushrooms were abundant in the forest, and berries were gathered by the bucketful. "Grandpa?" A familiar voice made him smile. Along the path from the gate came Marina in a light sundress with a backpack on her shoulders. "My dear child!" He rose to meet her. "I wasn't expecting you today." "Surprise!" she laughed, hugging her grandfather. "Look what I brought you." From her backpack she pulled out a hardcover book. On the cover, the silhouette of a white she-wolf against a winter forest, and above it the title, "The Guardian of the Wilderness." "It's out?" Geoffrey carefully took the book with trembling hands. "They published it after all?" Marina nodded, beaming with joy. "A small print run, but it's already in bookstores. And, people are reading it, discussing it. I've even received a few thank-you letters. They say they haven't read anything so genuine in a long time." Jeffrey opened the book, at the beginning of which was a dedication. To my grandmother and grandfather, guardians not only of the wilderness, but of eternal human values, kindness, loyalty, gratitude. "You've done well, Marina," he murmured, barely holding back tears. "Antonia would be proud. Oh, how proud she would be." They sat on the porch until dusk. Marina talked about plans for a second edition, about offers from other publishers, about how her life had changed this past year. "I don't just work at the newspaper anymore," she said. "I'm writing a long feature about the Pacific Northwest, about local legends, about humanity's connection to nature. I travel a lot, talk to people." "To whom else, besides people?" Jeffrey suddenly asked, narrowing his eyes slyly. Marina fell silent, looking at her grandfather in surprise. "What do you mean?" Jeffrey shrugged. "Oh, nothing special. It just seemed like you had something else you wanted to say, something important." Marina looked away, as if making a decision. Then she said quietly, "Remember, I told you about that girl in the white fur coat that I gave a ride to last year?" Her grandfather nodded. "I saw her again," Marina said almost in a whisper. "This spring, I was in the national park gathering material for my article. I got lost, wandered off somewhere, and suddenly she appeared on the trail, in the same white fur coat, even though it was already May, and warm." Jeffrey listened, not interrupting. "She didn't say a word," Marina continued. "She just turned and walked ahead on the trail. I followed her. 20 minutes later, we came right to the park ranger station. I wanted to thank her, turned around, and she was gone, as if she dissolved between the trees." "And the tracks?" Jeffrey asked softly. "Did you see tracks?" Marina nodded, and tears glistened in her eyes. "Wolf tracks, Grandpa. Big wolf tracks, leading into the thicket." Jeffrey smiled and placed his wrinkled palm on his granddaughter's hand. "Guardians of the wilderness, Marina. They are always nearby, even when we don't see them, especially with those who know how to listen to the forest, who honor its laws, and remember kindness." From the depths of the wilderness, as if to confirm his words, a long wolf howl echoed, melodic, pure, full of ancient primal power. Marina and Jeffrey exchanged glances, and both smiled, as people who share a great secret do. "Time to light the fire," the old man finally said, rising. "It'll be cool tonight." "I'll help." Marina stood up too. "You know, Grandpa, I'm thinking of moving here to Pine Ridge, closer to the source of stories." Jeffrey stopped, disbelieving his ears. "Seriously? What about the city? Your career?" "I can write from here," his granddaughter shrugged. "And stories. Real stories aren't born in city apartments, but in places like this, where nature and humans still speak the same language." Her grandfather didn't answer, just hugged his granddaughter tightly. And above the wilderness, countless stars stretched across the night sky, and somewhere in its depths, among the constellations, perhaps a new star flickered, the soul of the white she-wolf who had forever bound her destiny to the family of Jeffrey. The ranger, they say that in particularly cold winters, residents of Pine Ridge sometimes see a white silhouette at the edge of the forest, and sometimes, during severe blizzards, some travelers who have lost their way are visited by a guide in the form of a young woman in a white fur coat. She says not a word, simply walks ahead, pointing the way home, and when the danger passes, she disappears, leaving only a trail of wolf tracks in the snow. Such is the legend of the guardian of the wilderness, Whether to believe it or not, everyone decides for themselves. But old Ranger Jeffrey Miller always says, good deeds are never forgotten. They return, sometimes in the most unexpected guises. The main thing is to know how to recognize them. Thank you for watching. What do you think of this story? Share your thoughts. Your comment is very valuable to us.